Martin, and I'll be supporting these discussions and more on that as we go along. Thank you for muting when you're not speaking. It helps keep the background noise down, as we know. And I would just like to do a quick round of introductions, and we'll make this kind of speedy. If you could just say your name and the organization or the sector, the stakeholder group you're representing, that would be great. And I'm going to have everyone do this. So I'm going to start with you, Amy Bragg, if you wouldn't mind starting. Thank you.
I'm Amy Bragg. I'm a speech pathologist, but I'm also the site director for Two Rivers CDS in the Bangor, Brewer, Dover, Foxcroft area.
Thanks so much. Pam Scribner.
I'm Pam Scribner, the acting site director at CDS York.
Thank you. Andrea Richards.
I'm Andrea Richards. I'm the Director of Early Childhood Services at UCP in Bangor, and I'm here representing Maxby.
Thank you. Sarah D'Amico.
Sarah D'Amico, I'm the acting site director at Child Development Services REACH.
Thank you. Gail.
Hi, I'm Gail Page. I'm the director at Midcoast Regional CDS, and I'm also a licensed clinical social worker.
Thanks so much. Amy Belisle.
Amy Belisle, I'm a pediatrician. I'm the child health officer at Maine DHHS, representing the commissioner's office.
Thank you. Heather Henderson.
Heather Henderson, I'm the program manager and curriculum coordinator for CDS Preschools.
Thanks. Lori Whittemore.
I'm Lori Whittemore. I'm the director of preschool programming for CDS, opening new preschools.
Thank you. Denise Howell.
Good morning. I'm Denise Howell. I am the CDS site director for the Down East area.
Thank you. Barbara Brown.
Brown, director of CDS Peds, and I'm also a speech language pathologist. I apologize, my camera is not working this morning.
Okay. Thanks so much for being here. Laura Cordes. Oh, you're muted.
Good morning. My name is Laura Cordes. I don't serve in this group, but I'm just here to learn more. I'm the executive director of the Maine Association for Community Service Providers. Thank you.
Thank you. JC Holmes.
Federal State Legislative Liaison for the Department of Education.
Thank you. Emily Dowdy.
Hi, good morning. My name is Emily Dowdy. I'm the Educator Effectiveness Coordinator for the Department of Education.
Thank you. Marcy Whitcomb.
Hey, good morning. Marcy Whitcomb. I'm the Early Childhood Monitor, Program Monitor for the Maine Department of Education Early Learning Team.
Thanks so much. Roberta Lucas.
Good morning, everyone. I am Dr. Roberta Lucas, and I am the Director of CDS at the state level and the 619 Coordinator.
Thank you. Jamie Michaud.
Hi, I'm Jamie Michaud, and I am the Part C State Coordinator for Child Development Services.
Thanks. Nicole Medor.
Good morning, Nicole Medor, Early Childhood Specialist at the Department of Education on the Early Learning Team.
Thank you. And Deborah Mullis.
I'm Deb Mullis. I work for on Aaron's team at the Department of Education.
I think that's everyone. Thanks so much for that. We will invite you to remain muted when you're not speaking. You are welcome as we are. So here's the format for today. We are going to have presenters. We're going to move through. So we're all grounded in similar information and language, much of which you're familiar with, but we want to be sure we have a level starting point. So we've devoted a lot of time, the team devoted a lot of time to pulling together a presentation that we hope helps accomplish that. And you are welcome, if you have clarifying questions during the presentation, to drop them into chat. And my role will be to monitor and to filter your questions in, clarifying in nature. Like if there's an acronym or there's something you want to hear a little bit more about, please let us know. We're striving for understanding here. And so clarifying questions related to that are most welcome. We'll also have different discussion points, and I'll be facilitating those. So you'll know when I'm essentially opening the floor. I think most of you are at this point Zoom literate in terms of using the little, raise hand button on the bottom of the screen. You can see I just raised mine. I also have the ability to lower my own. So if you want in on the conversation where we're at the discussion points, you're welcome to use that feature. You're also welcome to just wave, and I'll be keeping an eye out for both and inviting you in at that point. We really hope we have all voices in as we're moving through the discussion today. And this is part 1 of 2. We are holding a similar session this evening, and we deliberately, it was sort of at my recommendation that we broke this group into 2 groups because it's large, the stakeholder group is large, and we wanted to be sure that all voices were going to be heard. So hence the method to try to increase room for discussion and get all voices in. And so we will have a hard stop today at 10:30. We want to honor our time limit and make sure you get on with your day. And I think with that, I will turn the floor over to you, Erin, to get us going.
All right, I'm going to share my screen now. I do know that many people are having technical power issues today, so I just want to understand if any of the presenters, hopefully one of us, we're in different places in the state, hopefully one of us will still be here to carry on if that is the case. My name is Erin Frazier. I'm the Director of Special Services Birth to 22 for the Department of Education. And I've been working closely with my counterparts at the DOE, Roberta Lucas, Dr. Roberta Lucas, Director of Early Childhood Special Education, Section 619 Coordinator, and Jamie Mishu, Part C Coordinator, who are both on this call. And we're going to be presenting together today in order to talk about this work and how we are approaching the work. So HB 176 LD 255 is a resolve directing the Department of Education to develop a plan for the provision of early intervention services. So there's 3 main components to this bill. First is to establish a stakeholder group to advise the department on the development of a plan for the provision of early intervention services for children from birth to under 3 years of age through a quasi-independent government agency structure. The second is to explore and make recommendations on the federal extended Part C option under 34 Code of Federal Regulations, Section 303.211, referred to in this resolve as the extended Part C option. And the third task of this bill is to make a recommendation to the department on the provision of services for children 3 years of age. And so those are the main components and what we are tasked to do in LD 255. And I'll pass it to my colleague, Roberta, to talk about the process we've gone through to this point.
Good morning, everyone. It's my privilege to let you know what we've been doing since we've been working on this bill and prior to in July of 2020. I just want to also let you know that all the asterisks on these next 2 slides are what was already in the PCG report that was done by at the request of the Ed Committee. So we have been working on some of these things for over a year. So in July of 2020, we initiated staff analysis, including job descriptions. We took a look at what was what our staff was doing, and then what we might want to include or review and redo. We did a lot of professional development on the IEP, the free and appropriate education, and we increased technical assistance to the CDS staff. In October 2020, new leadership came in. I started on October 10th of 2020 in CDS. So Jamie and I started with CDS in our new roles. We continue to have monthly meeting with OSEP and our National Technical Assistance Center, ECTA. We plan to provide technical assistance that was assisted by the ECTA, and they joined us to do that every month. And then we reinvigorated the Interagency Coordinating Council. It was already in place, but we added new members. We asked for more nominees to be part of the membership of that so that we could get a good rounded group of stakeholders to help with that, with the work that was before us with the ICC. In March 2021, we had initial planning meeting with Maine PERS. And then in April of 2021, we expanded the list of established conditions for automatic eligibility for Part C, which was also part of the PCG report. Next slide. In May of 2021, we reviewed Part C extended option with the National Technical Assistance Center and got some great information from them. We reviewed the memorandum of understanding that was already in place with DHHS. And we also set aside some federal funds for rebranding CDS Part C. In July of 2021, we initiated internal planning for stakeholder groups. In August of 2021, we requested the nominees to the stakeholder group and then sent save the date for everyone's calendar. We continued internal planning on all the LDs before us, and we contracted with an external facilitator, Carol, who is joining us this morning to support the stakeholder group. In October and November, in October and November 2021, the stakeholder, we're meeting today, and then we have again another meeting in November, and then in December, the initial report will be completed for submission to the Ed Committee. Part of the work that is in this bill is that we have to appoint a chair. And so the appointed chair will be required to report out and attend the work session at the Educational and Cultural Affairs Committee. So if you'd like to nominate yourself or another member, please email Erin Fraser at aaron.fraser@maine.gov by 11/5/2021. We'd like you to include a brief bio of the nominee and why you feel this individual will make an effective chair. And the chair position will be announced prior to the next meeting on November 22nd, 2021.
So we wanted to kind of provide you with this bill 255 really deals mostly with Part C services, but we really wanted to give a foundational overview of how this is all monitored and supported and structured under the federal government. So this visual shows you that the U.S. Department of Education is at the top of the chain here in terms of who is monitoring and overseeing services to states. In the U.S. Department of Education, there is the Office of Special Education Programs, OSEP. We'll refer to OSEP frequently throughout this presentation. OSEP monitors in turn the Maine Department of Education, and in federal language, the Department of Education is known as a State Education Agency, or SEA. And in the SEA, there must be a Director of Special Education, a Director of Early Childhood Special Education, and an Early Intervention Director. So those roles are held by myself. I'm the Director of Special Education. The Director of Early Childhood Special Education, also known as Section 619, is Roberta Lucas, and Jamie Michaud is the Early Intervention Director. And so I'm going to pass it on to Jamie to describe how Part C fits under the MDOE.
So Part C is the section of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act that covers infants and toddlers, birth through age 2, who have developmental delays or disabilities, and their families. So the unique part of Part C is that children who are eligible receive services through what's called an Individual Family Service Plan, or IFSP, which identifies the priorities, resources, and concerns of the family. And this is all administered under a federal grant, the federal Part C grant from OSEP.
And I'm going to explain Part B, the educational guidelines for children ages 3 to 5, and that's 619. And under 619, children 3 to 5, Maine receives IDEA federal grant funds for 619, and then services are delivered through an individual education program. The individual education program is supposed to address the academic, the functional and developmental needs of the child and build an education plan to address those if they qualify for special education. The same is under Part B 611. And 611 addresses children's 5 to 21. We also receive IDEA grant funds, and services are delivered also through an IEP addressing the academic, functional, and developmental needs of a child. And we just want to give you the helpful hint that it's C to B means crib to bed.
That's how you're going to remember the difference from C to B. All right, service provision in Maine. Service provision for children in special education, Part B, is unique in Maine, the way we have it structured. There's not, most states have their Part B services in what they call the local educational agency. In Maine, we call that the School Administrative Unit, or SAU. So we have two different levels of under IDEA. One is the Part C, the crib early intervention services served through an IFSP, and the focus there is a family focus. And then starting at age 3, children have access to a free appropriate public education. They are now served, they transition to an individual education plan, and the focus is educational. So there's a different focus between Part C and Part B. Currently, Child Development Services, which has 9 regional sites, operates and serves children in Part C and in Part B 619. So they do the early intervention program, and that is birth to 2, services delivered through an IFSP. And then they transition to services, special education services, and free appropriate public education for children aged 3 to 5. We do receive a grant that covers the Section 619 children, and services are delivered through an IEP. Then in Maine, at the age of 5, the School Administrative Unit takes over the free appropriate public education for children ages 5 through 22. They also receive IDEA grants from the federal government that are passed through from my office. And then the services are delivered through an IEP. And so we're going to take a look now at how the structure has worked for Maine.
Thanks so much, Erin, and Roberta and Jamie as well. So we would love to open up the floor and seek some input from you. And we'll start from a strengths-based perspective, what you think has been working in terms of this structure. And then we'll spend a little bit of time talking about the challenges within it too, the challenges that it has presented from your vantage point. So again, I'll encourage you to use your little raise hand icon if that's at all convenient, or to just sort of wave and we will we'll keep an eye out. So anybody, I always have special gratitude for the first person who gets us going. Thoughts on this? Things that are working within this structure from your vantage point and the vantage point of those you are here to represent. Thanks, Gail, for getting us going.
Well, I just want to say that I think the transition process that we have in place going from Part C to Part B is working really well. You know, the Part C team and the Part B team have a really good working relationship. So I think from a family's perspective, it works well. And it's a shift, but it can be a pretty painless shift because of the relationship.
Thanks so much. Others? Amy Bragg?
I just want to kind of go along with what Gail said. I think that in the past, that transition from C to B hasn't been so smooth, but over the years, as our Part B teams and our Part C teams have figured out ways to work together more closely, earlier on in the process, I think it's turned into a much better working machine. The oil has gotten oiled up much better now.
All right, great, thanks. So it sounds like things have continuously been refined and that's been helpful. Sarah?
Also, just jumping on with Part C, that it's a model that works really well for most families. I get a lot of positive feedback from families about the relationships they have with their primary service providers. And that's also a process where kids are placed with providers quickly, and that we see good gains.
Thanks so much. Denise?
What I was going to share was that regarding the Part C model, I think that it is well received nationally. We are looked at as a leader nationally in the provision of these services for birth through age 3. And staff are very proud of the work that they do with those children.
Thanks so much. Gail, I don't know if your hand is still up or if it's a hanging Chad, or you want back in. All right, you took it down, looks like. Okay, thanks. I know, it's so easy to forget that stuff. All right. Others here on what's working well, what the strengths are right now, the current structure. Lori, good morning.
I think within Part B, under Aaron and Roberta, we've made a lot of good changes to structures. We're certainly challenged by not having enough staff to implement them, but the actual structure of, for example, having to have a meeting within 15 days of referral has expedited our response to families, has gotten them at a table at an IEP meeting quickly, and we're able to engage with them and start to build that relationship. And that was a really positive change that we made to eliminate children waiting a long time to get that first meeting to determine what type of evaluations they needed.
Thanks so much. There's one in at this point. And you may be thinking, yes, ditto to some of that. And if so, you're welcome to say ditto in the chat because it always helps us to know. Denise and then Gail.
I was going to share that regarding the Part B, 3 to 5-year-old piece, that the direction that we have received, as well as the K through 22 piece, is that we are all, we follow the same law, and that in CDS, we would do the same things the way that the public school would do them. And that in itself is helping children, because then the message is it's just not the 3 to 5-year-olds do it this way and then kindergarten does it this way. It's a continuum across, and that has been positive and helpful.
That's great. Thank you so much. Gail?
I just want to say that I think one of the things that works really well currently is that the C and the B teams come together so that they learn from each other. They have a good understanding of, that whole transition process, what happens in Part C, what happens in Part B, and there are differences. But I think that's really a positive for what is working now. And I will say, for me, as a director, I sit in all of our Part C team meetings. So, and I've worked in Part C prior to being a director. So, that's also makes for a good connection between the two teams for B and C.
Thank you. What are some of the challenges with the current structure? What would be helpful for us to be sure we hear from you? What are some of the challenges? Denise?
One of the challenges is that because the Part C language mode of delivery is very different than the Part B, that sometimes Part C staff and Part B staff don't understand what they understand cognitively what the other one does, but they don't do that. So there is sometimes some challenges in communication, but I think with the way that it is structured, that is not that would happen anyway, and it's just a matter of really good communication skills.
Thank you. Lori?
I would say, because I have a 25-year perspective on Part B, it's always been a house of cards in the way that we deliver the services in a fee-for-service model and being so dependent on contracted providers. And in the last, with COVID and just, Roberta and Aaron coming in and rightfully, having expectations that we really implement the law as it's intended. So the expectations are higher. I feel like the house of cards is really tumbling, to be honest with you. I feel like in my role as a site director, it was challenging to have enough staff, have enough trained staff who really understood what their responsibilities were. Having enough services, certainly, many, many children waiting for services. In my new role as the director of preschool programming, I'm tasked with opening new programs, which I've opened 4 new programs in the last 6 months. Only to find that I can't find enough ed techs. And then even when we do have enough, we have staff, we can't get the children there because of lack of transportation, because we've lost transportation companies because of COVID. And then there's more COVID restrictions on numbers of children in vehicles. So it's all just this domino effect of not being able to provide the services that the children desperately need.
Thank you. And house of cards to me suggests really fragile, right? Like,
yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks so much. I just want to quickly note that Aaron, you put in the chat, having Part B separated into another agency makes them feel like 2 distinct services. So duly noted on that front. Sarah?
Yeah, kind of piggybacking on what Lori said, another difficult aspect with Part B is because we don't have universal pre-K in Maine. We have a lot of great childcare programs that because of pay rates and because of the staffing shortage, they're not able to get the really high quality teachers that we see in public schools. And so we have children that are having these behaviors and having an adverse effect. But I oftentimes feel if we had them in a really well-structured preschool, we wouldn't need them to have the same amount of services they do. So it's again coming back to that we're using a lot of different schools, a lot of different providers. It's hard not kind of having everyone underneath us.
Thank you. Denise? You're muted still. I think you tried to unmute.
Yeah, I
There you
did. I cover Washington County. Prior to COVID, we had a tremendous difficulty with transportation. So I'm piggybacking on what Lori said. It is a wide, it's a large area, and there really are no transportation service providers. So the children can't get to programs, can't get to services. COVID has just made it worse. The other thing I wanted to share was lack of providers, particularly speech and language pathologists. And if you're looking at 3 to 5-year-olds, that's going to be the major, across the board, that's one of the major areas of need. So it is very stressful and difficult to get the things that are required on the IEP in those rural areas.
Thanks so much. Yeah. Andrea?
I think for providers, it's difficult sometimes to explain the differences and how the main care services and CDS or DOE services work together. We really want to be able to explain to parents, one continuous program that we're offering. And I think it can feel kind of disjointed sometimes because not everyone has all the information about both pieces.
Thank you. Nicole?
Thanks, Carol. I just wanted to build off to what Denise said originally, and then what Andrea is reiterating now too. When we're interacting with public schools, we sort of see or pick up on the same challenge of sort of this lack of translation, or the way the language in Part B 619 is, translating that to Part B 611, right? So our public pre-K students that are receiving services through CDS is one bucket, but then in kindergarten, just a few months later, they're receiving it in another bucket. And those two worlds aren't communicating and interacting everywhere in a positive way, right? So our public pre-K teachers are struggling because it's sort of a your job, my job, unintended consequence of the way we have 619 right now. Our service providers come in, provide the service, and then leave. So there's really a lack of chance to really build a relationship and have communication. They're not bumping into each other in the teachers' rooms, right? They're not meeting at the photocopiers in the morning to chit chat real quick about a student's concerns or progress or what have you. We're sort of a come and go. So the current structure really lacks the ability for our regular education teachers to really form and understand a relationship with our service providers, to really have that sort of cohesive instruction for the student and goal setting for the student. So.
Thank you. In the interest of time, I'm going to invite anyone else who has challenges they would like to share or build on what we've heard so far into the chat. I'm going to move us along and turn the floor back over to you, Erin, so we can continue the overview.
It's hard to find the mute button when you're presenting because you have this weird view on your screen. So we're going to talk about free appropriate public education because that is really the shift that transpires when a child has their third birthday. So under IDEA, public schools are required to provide each child with a disability with a free appropriate public education. We speak about FAPE all the time, and so we're going to be using that acronym in the rest of our presentation. We have to provide that FAPE in the least restrictive environment and at no cost to the child's parents. The legal concept of FAPE is shorthand for free appropriate public education. In a nutshell, it is an individualized education program that's designed to meet the child's unique needs and from which the child receives educational benefit and prepares them for further education, employment, and independent living. In Maine, as defined by Maine Unified Special Education Regulations, or MUSER, Maine has identified different timeframes for FAPE for different age groups. So for 3-year-olds, FAPE is 6 hours a week. For 4-year-olds, FAPE is 9 hours a week. And for school-age children, that's 5 through 22, the amount of FAPE is dependent on the amount of hours per week, and that varies around the state from 30 to 32 hours, depending on where you live. So basically, the free appropriate public education that we have to have children access at the age of 3 is 6 hours of preschool education, and at 4, it's 9 hours. And so I'm going to pass it on to Jamie and Roberta to explore the difference between early intervention and FAPE.
So this slide is going to reiterate some of the information from the previous slide, but we recognize how confusing it can be to take in and then use terminology around these two very distinct programs under IDEA. So early intervention for infants and toddlers birth through the age of 3, those services are delivered through an individualized family service plan, or IFSP. There is no defined time expectations as the timing per week that Erin just described under FAPE. Instead, the frequency and intensity of services in Part C are completely individualized for each child and family. All children who are determined eligible under Part C go under the eligibility criteria of developmental delay. Our focus is on supporting the parents or the other caregivers in the child's life versus working directly with the child. So the focus of early intervention is really to help the family, help the child grow and develop. The focus of intervention is on the 5 major developmental domains, including physical, cognitive, self-help or adaptive, communication, and social emotional. But the way we approach that work is by providing strategies that families can embed within their daily routines and activities to promote development in all of those areas. And then lastly, a big difference between Part C and Part B is that early intervention services occur within the natural environment. So instead of having children and families come to us, we go to them. So we are tasked with providing these services wherever the child would naturally be during the day. Most of the time that's home or childcare. It can also be other community settings where children without developmental delays and disabilities in this age range would be. An example might be story time at the local library or a play group.
And then Part B, the FAPE side, free and appropriate education. Just like early intervention, we have a required document, which is called the Individual Education Plan. And its focus is on academic, developmental, and functional needs of the child. And they have a time frame around that Erin explained earlier. For 3-year-olds, it's 6 hours. The IEP team can look at the 3-year-old and determine what the 6 hours are, and if the child may or may not need more. Or a 4-year-old may have 9 hours of school of free and appropriate education, sorry. Also under Part B, it is required to have a certified special education teacher implementing the plan. So every child that has an IEP must have a 282 or a special education teacher tied to that plan and oversee the implementation of that plan. The Maine Early Learning and Developmental Standards, which are aligned with the school learning standards, are also considered as part of the academic needs of the child when looking at the goals for a child. And under IDEA FAPE on the 3 to 5-year-olds, there are 15 qualifying disabilities based on the evaluation and the eligibility determination for that child.
So I will just add that one of the factors of qualifying for FAPE is that you must meet the criteria of one of the qualifying disabilities. And those include learning disability, autism, deaf and hard of hearing, to just name a few. The other thing I want people to really be clear about is that the FAPE offer doesn't mean for a 3-year-old you get 6 hours of specially designed instruction or therapy, related service therapies. It means that you should have what you need in terms of special education to access 6 hours of preschool programming. So sometimes those things are confusing for people to understand. So let's talk about the extended Part C option. The extended Part C option only applies to children served in Part C who turn 3 and transition and are determined eligible for Part B. And you remember we said there was a evaluation process where you have to fit into one of the 15 categories of disability in order to qualify. It provides early intervention services in lieu of FAPE from a children's 3rd birthday until those children enter or are eligible under state law to enter kindergarten. So each state determines in this option the applicable age and duration of the extended option. OSEP has provided guidance, and it can also be applied to a subset of children turning 3, such as children turning 3 over the summer. So The three options for extended eligibility are from age 3, from the 3rd birthday until the beginning of the school year following the child's 3rd birthday, from age 3 until the beginning of the school year following the child's 4th birthday, or from age 3 until the beginning of the school year following the child's 5th birthday. Parents can either choose either the Part C option or to transition to free appropriate public education in the Part B system. Services in the Part C option are continued on an IFSP with an addition of an educational component that promotes school readiness and incorporates pre-literacy, language, and numeracy skills. But they would continue under the IFSP and they would be delaying the FAPE option. Families can request a change to FAPE at any time. And I'm going to let Jamie speak to you about Biden's proposal and how that might impact the extended Part C option.
Yeah, so while we're presenting to you this information about the extended Part C option, which is something that we would apply to OSEP and would need prior approval in order to implement in our state. At the same time we're thinking about this, there is some things happening federally. So President Biden, in his proposal for fiscal year 2022 budget, he has proposed to fully fund the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA. So this would bring about millions of more dollars to IDEA grants nationally to be dispersed amongst all the states. And specifically, this would bring, if passed, $250 million extra dollars to the Part C grant funding. And as part of that additional funding, President Biden has proposed that states be allowed to use their regular grant funding for Part C to allow children who are in Part C to continue with those services after their 3rd birthday until the beginning of the next school year. So this would eliminate any sort of gap between the child turning 3, exiting Part C early intervention services, and then having to wait until the next school year to begin with their Part B 619 services through an IEP. So in his proposal, this would become part of what Part C offers routinely, and that would be in place for everyone under the same criteria without this extended Part C option that has to be approved through OSEP in the way that it's currently done.
And an important point there is that you would not have to be eligible for Part B services to continue your Part C services, correct, Jamie? You could just extend it until the next school year. Is that true?
I haven't seen the exact language, Erin, but it is my understanding that children in Part C would stay in Part C until the beginning of that next school year when their Part B services start.
Okay. So I'm going to retract that. I don't know that that's true.
But what we wouldn't have to do is that extra piece you described, Erin, about adding the additional outcomes to a plan around pre-academics, pre-literacy, and shifting the IFSP to include goals that are more aligned with the Part B 619 programming.
Amy, I see your hand. If you have a clarifying question, you want to drop it in chat? Or maybe you're going to illuminate this point, I'm not sure.
I guess I was just asking, are these 3 different options the state would pick one, or all 3 would be available?
The state would pick one. We'd have to put what we would want in our application to OSEP to provide this service. So let's talk about who does use this extended Part C option. Currently, there are 2 states in our country that elect the Part C extended option. Both of those states are currently electing the option to age 4. So they're choosing the second prong, which is from the third birthday to the start of the school year, in which after the child turns 4 years of age. So in Maryland, the data from 2009 to 2019 showed the percent of children in Part C option. Sorry, my camera is closing, blocking the view. Compared to the October 1 count, because we have a child count in October 1, was between 11 and 15%. 15% was the highest percentage, and that occurred in 2011. In DC, data from 2014 to 2017 showed the percent of children served in Part C was between 9 and 14, almost 15%. There are some federal funds available for extended Part C option through OSEP, and funds are divided amongst the states for the option. The next application deadline is not until May of 2022. So why is it important to understand what these other states are doing and how much of their population actually is choosing or electing this choice? One of the ways that we can look at it from Maine is through our own data. We know that we are not really like Maryland or Washington, D.C. in terms of the amount of population that we have in Maine. So we've looked at eligibility from C to B, in that children who are eligible for Part C after the C to B transition. We looked in the past 3 years. The last 2 years are likely somewhat impacted by COVID. One of the reasons was because we couldn't evaluate children during COVID. So that really made us, as a country, really not having a delay in some of the evaluations that occurred for children to find them eligible. So even though we have the data for the last 2 years, so you can get an understanding of how many children we're talking about in Maine, we have given you the year before COVID. And so in 2018 to 2019, there were 704 children that went through the transition meeting, and 580 of those children were found eligible. So if we looked at 15% of 580, 87 children statewide would likely be choosing this Part C extension. And I apologize, we were supposed to get the number for the 3-year-old children. How many 3-year-old children in 2018 and 2019? I'll get that number for you outside this meeting. The reason we want you to see that number is because during the 3rd year of age, we have people being referred more frequently for services. So even though there are 580 children eligible for Part B, we have many, many more children who have an IEP in Part B as a 3-year-old. I think this year it was somewhere around 800 children who are 3 years of age who had an active IEP. So if you look at the Part C extended eligibility, we just want to be sure you recognize that this would only be an option for children who are found eligible in B. And if we're looking at and analyzing the data from the other states, that would be at a high end, 15% of the population. It started a little bit lower. It started around 9%. So that would be under approximately 50 kids who'd be taking part of the Part C extended option. So we just want to make sure that you have a good understanding of how many children we're talking about in Maine who could be electing this option. And Roberta, I'll have you review the pros and the deltas of the extended Part C option.
Thank you. So when looking at the pros, we just want to think about that there are no gaps in services between Part C ending and Part B beginning. It's individualized, offers parents options, offers a natural transition time beginning of the school year as opposed to in the middle of the school year. If you have a birthday in January or if the child has a birthday in June, it just it's a natural beginning for a school year. And parents can change their mind at any time. and it provides parent support for a longer period of time, which they often request and seek. The deltas are a delay in FAPE, 6 hours of preschool education option, no clear expectation for pre-academic skills. There's a potential lack of preparation for school age services, limits peer-to-peer opportunities, lack of staff preparedness to provide pre-academic skills in Part C, and there are budgetary implications for staff training and acquiring additional staff for this option. Carol, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Roberta. We would love, as you're sort of following this thought progression and the information, to know if you're seeing other pros and deltas, other cons, other, sort of weaknesses or disadvantages to this. So I'm just going to, Gail, would love, thanks for jumping in. Yep.
Well, I just want to say that when you have a child that turns 3 with our current system, in the middle of the year, finding a program for that child can be a real challenge because often programs are full. If you have a child that turns, 3 in, December and they're, going over to Part B. So I think that's something to take into consideration with this as well.
Thanks so much. Others? Andrea, I see you have a question here, I think. Would a child accessing Part C extended option be able to start center-based programming under the IFSP?
No, Andrea. So the IFSP would continue to be implemented as we are required under Part C of federal IDEA. So it would still look like services that are provided to children under 3 years old with the focus on the family, with the difference that we would add some outcomes and some services to start addressing some pre-academic skills, but that would occur within the natural environment as we are required to provide those services under Part C.
Thanks, Andrea, and thanks, Jamie. Denise and then Sarah, pros or cons here?
So my question is very much related to Andrea's and what Jamie just said, as well as I believe would be a pro, in that it's my understanding if, so the pro, meaning that the child could start the academic year in September with same age peers. Prior to that, with this extended option, if the parent asked or identified a need for pre-academic skills, couldn't the IFSP then add that outcome and provide not so much a direct, I'm not talking about an SDI type thing, I'm talking about, just as Jamie said, which is activities and strategies that parents can do with children within their natural environment, within the routines of their day. And if so, I would say that's a pro.
Thank you, Jamie. I'm seeing you nodding. Anything you want to say on this front?
Yes, Denise, that was a really good point to bring up that I actually hadn't thought of until this moment. So thank you for sharing that. Outcomes on an IFSP, which, we really haven't talked a lot about, but they are family driven in Part C. So families are part of a process where they generate what they would like support around, either with their child or with their family as a whole. And if families wanted to work on pre-academics under Part C without this Part C extended option, we absolutely can do that and would honor that.
Thanks. Sarah?
Just one comment about that academic piece. At least at our site in the Portland area, a lot of the children coming in at 3 or even 4 with IEPs, they really don't have a lot of academic goals. It's primarily their developmental delays that are impacting their ability to access their academics. So I don't see that as being as much as an issue. And I just had a question, if a parent elected that they want to stay with Part C, is there an option where we could utilize like peer play groups? Because I think that's an option. A lot of parents that they really love Part C, but they just want to give their child, you know, an hour a week where they get to interact with peers or where they can get some coaching with peer play. Is that a possibility with this model?
So with our natural environment requirements, Sarah, we would have the ability to provide services on an IFSP within a setting that the parent would be electing to have the child participate in. So if that family and child were participating in some sort of toddler play group as their natural routine, then the primary service provider through Part C could meet them and provide intervention during that daily routine or weekly routine for the family. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so in other words, it wouldn't be something that CDS could set up. I mean, maybe something it wouldn't even be on an IFSP, but just that CDS provides weekly, you know, toddler groups, and parents can elect to bring their children there or not. Would that ever be an option, or it's just not related?
It would not, it wouldn't be a service on an IFSP.
CDS could link to a service and could potentially, like in your area in reach, they would say, here are the toddler groups that are happening across this area. And the parent would then elect to choose that. And then the CDS service could be, that could be part of the natural environment. We wouldn't be providing that as an educational environment.
So the parent would have to pay for that.
Okay. Thank you. Duly noted. Amy Belisle, I'm noticing that you put in chat, would this help with wait list planning purposes for Part B?
So I'm just going to say there can't be wait lists in Part B. We can't not provide FAPE. We are in a situation right now where we don't have as many services as are required in our state. And Roberta, myself, and the CDS team are working madly to create it. We've created 10 classrooms and 20 more on the way. So that can't be a reason for extended Part C services option. We have to have these services in the state available to children at 3 years of age. And that's what we're doing. We don't believe that there should be any unmet need in our state. So it's kind of counterintuitive to think about the extended option supporting a lack of services when we really have to provide the service.
IDEA requires that we provide services as soon as a child is identified. So it is federally mandated that we provide services to a child once they become eligible.
Not unlike a school district who has a child transfer into their school, they can't delay special education services. We cannot either.
Thanks for clarifying. And Deb Mullis, I see you put a question in chat. Would pre-academic inclusion in Part C require additional staff or other certification?
There is no certification requirement for pre-academic skills, and it also is not defined what pre-academic skills are meant. And so we would have to, as a state, determine, as you know, as Sarah pointed out, academic skills for a 3-year-old, you know, we have MELDs to provide a focus of where they should be, but it would be not clear. We would have to develop what the pre-academic skills were and then train Part C staff additionally. I don't know if you wanted to add anything, Jamie.
Yeah, that was a very comprehensive description of that part, Erin. I thought that I could be helpful addressing the staffing part of the question. So yes, if we were to apply and be approved for the Part C extended option, even if we're just looking at that estimate of 87 children potentially statewide who may elect this option, given our data from pre-COVID, if we just look at those 87 children as an example, that would require on average 2 additional service coordinators and 4 additional primary service providers. So we would be looking at minimum with just that 87 children, about 6 full-time positions to be added in Part C.
Thank you. And I'm noting, Sarah, that you added, we have a lot of parents who are nervous about having their child enroll in preschool and switching from C to B. Extending Part C could potentially allow for a longer transition. Parenthetically, social stories provided by the PSP about going to school. Possibly the PSP could tour the school with the child and parent over the summer before the academic year starts, et cetera, to sort of help ease that transition. And Amy, I'm noting, Belial, you have a question. Would you have a recommendation for families around timing? This would be a good option for 2 months, but better to go to Part B if going to be more than 4 months, et cetera.
We're using this group to get feedback on what your option might be, looking at the strengths and needs. One of the real pros to something like this is the fact that you're not transitioning mid-year from a service to a service. So in other words, if your 3rd birthday falls in January and the parent, as Sarah said, many parents become very involved with their Part C personnel because they're in their homes and supporting them in a very different way than FAPE is a support that's provided to children. So one of the real benefits to extending this out, let's say to the 3rd year, the school year after the child turns 3, is that you can have that service for a little bit longer and it's a more natural transition. And you're not doing the transition in the middle of the school year where you're joining a program already in progress. Beyond that, beyond the 3rd birthday, so for instance, the 2 states that do this go to the 4th birthday, it's you are delaying FAPE for another year. Some parents may choose that, but again, when we think about providing the necessary preschool experience to transition into kindergarten in a way that's strong, it may be that for Maine, people feel that extending it out to 4 or even 5 years of age might be too long. So that's something, Dr. Belial, that we're looking to you to see what you think about that. Do you think that extending it to the 3rd birthday, to the year after the 3rd birthday, makes sense? But beyond that, doesn't make sense. But I'm not trying to give you an idea. I just want to we want to hear people's opinions about if we were to do this option, what your thoughts are around that.
I mean, if you're asking me specifically, I guess I was concerned about a child who might turn 3 in, let's say, November. And you're saying, well, we're going to extend them out to next school year. So that's another 10 months that they would be not in a Part B program. So maybe that would not be ideal versus someone who turned 3 in March or April, and it's just a few months. So I think that was my initial question. I do think at some point, going out to the 4th birthday is probably, maybe fine depending on what services are available. But I think we do want to start to get kids ready for school, and helping parents make that transition, although challenging, I think is an important one, is to get, so that children are ready to go into the academic experience.
Thank you. Denise?
I think for me, one of the problems in this with children is that development happens when development happens. So between 3 and 5, children are developing at different rates, and those with developmental delays, obviously, the development is probably more affected. So when we talk about pre-academics for a 3-year-old, it worries me a little bit. And when we look at those 5 developmental areas, I think the key is, how do we enrich those children's environments, whether it be in the home, in a childcare, or in a preschool setting, so that they can develop in those developmental areas so that they can learn the pre-academics. And I think that is just a general kind of comment and concern. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm noting in the chat that Andrea, you commented if a parent opted not to utilize the extended Part C option, would the recommendation be that Part B,
Yeah, I just realized that there are 3 people in the attending room that are supposed to be in this room, and I apologize. I didn't have, as the presenter of the Zoom, I did not notice that. So we have 3 members who've been listening and who are now participants, and they are all people who are on the stakeholder group. So I apologize to those people, and I apologize to the group for letting them in so late. So I apologize.
okay, thank you and welcome. Maybe I'll just pause and invite you newcomers, you've been listening, I think, to quickly introduce yourselves, just so we have your voice in the room and everyone knows who you are and where you came from, who you're representing. Thank you. So if you just newly arrived, please introduce yourself. Marcy, I think you're one of them.
No, I've actually been here.
Oh, my
Since the beginning.
apologies.
No, that's okay.
All right.
Thanks.
Diane Johnson. Yeah, Diane is new.
Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Diane Johansson. I work at Pretty Flaherty, and we represent Maxby at the legislature. So thank you for letting me listen in this morning.
I see what's happening to my screen. Becky Gilman.
Hi, I'm Becky Gilman. I'm the Acting Site Director for CDS Heuristic.
Okay. And Barbara Brown?
Barbara Brown is back. I have regained my electricity and internet.
Oh,
so
good.
I was here at the beginning. Thank you.
Yes, you were. Okay. Just acknowledging your reappearance. Okay.
Thank you.
I think that's everyone, right, Erin?
Yeah, that's everyone.
All right. I will go back and Andrea, get grounded in the question that you were posing. If a parent opted not to utilize the extended Part C option, would the recommendation be that Part B three-year-olds remain with CDS or slide to the SAU with age 4?
I'm going to try to ground myself in that question. In the extended Part C option, would the recommendation be that Part B3 remains? So if in the extended Part C option, the 3-year-old services, remember, is something that we're trying to determine who would provide that. Would that be the SAU? Would it be a quasi-governmental organization like CDS? So no, it would not be that, like if the parent or family elected the Part C option and then unelected it, meaning they wanted to go to FAPE, they would go into a preschool program and have access to their, as a 3-year-old, 6 hours of programming, as a 4-year-old, 9 hours of programming. So they wouldn't slide necessarily to the SAU. Andrea, in your question here, you kind of have the assumption, I think, that the SAUs have 4-year-olds at this point. If you stay with the Part B services FAPE and stay with that line, there's no sliding. You just get the service. Whoever's providing the service is providing the service. And the Part C option, again, we're trying to get feedback. Would people like the Part C option? If they'd like it, would they like it to 3? Would they like it to 4? Would they like it to 5? And then at any time, a parent can say, I think I'd rather go get my preschool services. So I'm going to go and elect to do that. We'd have a meeting to discuss changing that over to an IEP. I think, Andrea, does that answer your question?
I guess so it sounds like the extended Part C would be with CDS, but my question was if the parents didn't want to do the extended Part C, would they still be working with CDS in this model?
Whoever is providing Part B service. So at this time, yes, they would be working with CDS as a 3, 4, or 5-year-old right now, because we haven't transitioned those children to SAUs at this time. So yes, If they elected not to do the Part C option, they would transition to Part B and we would find them preschool services.
So we don't have a concrete answer on what they would be choosing between necessarily, because we don't have the Part 4 ironed out yet.
No, I mean, I think that we have that pretty well ironed out. We know that preschool programming for 3-year-olds is 6 hours of access to preschool per week. And for 4-year-olds, it's 9 hours to access per week. Right now, CDS is providing those services. And in the future, SAUs will be providing those services from age 4 and up. But right now, we all have to provide those services, and they, whoever's providing them, we would be doing that if they wanted to transition to Part B services. CDS, the quasi-governmental agency called CDS, right now is providing Part C services and would be providing the extended Part C option if parents elected that. I still feel like I don't know if that answered your question.
I guess my question is, if parents would be choosing between working with CDS or the district, would that be a parent choice in this process?
Not with this option, because right now we have CDS providing 3 to 5-year-old services. Roberta, did you want to say something?
It was me, Erin. Andrea, so part of this work for this bill is also figuring out the 3-year-olds. So your question is a great question. It's another piece of this work that we're looking for your input around, which would be who would be tackling those 3-year-olds who are receiving Part B, not as part of this Part C extended option. If we were to apply and be approved for that, who would be responsible for those 3-year-olds? So we would definitely be informing families about their choice at that point and who would be covering those services. But right now, as part of this work, that's part of what we still need to figure out. Does that help, Andrea?
The other thing, Andrea, that I will add is that if we chose to do this, let's say folks were interested in us electing this and we applied next May, we could provide extended Part C option as soon as July 1st, even though nothing has changed with how we deliver services in age 3 to 5 for CDS. So in other words, this can occur much more quickly than a transition of services for 3-year-olds, if that makes sense.
It would be July of 22 if OSEP approved.
Right. And that would be ahead of any transition that would happen between 3-year-old services for CDS, potentially.
Okay, thank you. In the interest of time, I'm going to note some comments in the chat, both for recording purposes, but just because I'm not sure if everyone can see everything, given your various platforms. One was a comment that, Nicole, you're building on an earlier comment by Denise that there are no pre-academic requirements for entering the public school. With that said, we want our teachers to be ready for the student and the student family to have the transition supports. And Deb Mullis, it's also important to note that there's an evaluation process from C to B, and children need to be eligible for Part B. And last, Roberta, another delta would be if there are approximately 87 children across the state. I'll just add that in case for context. They would likely not be clustered in one part of the state, but would be very dispersed throughout the whole state between the 9 regional sites. So noting that, I'll take the next 2 comments, and then in the interest of time, I'm going to invite people to continue to comment in chat. Lori and then Sarah.
I think my perspective is that especially if President Biden is going to support children waiting until the following school year, I definitely see some benefits in starting with your peer group and starting school together and not joining a peer group in March or April. And as Erin said, we can't have children waiting per the law, but the reality is often when we get to that late in the winter, we don't have slots for children. And so then they wait with no services. I would be very concerned about extending beyond that, to be honest. I know I'm in a school today. I've seen lots of children come into our new classrooms who are pretty disabled and they don't have the skills yet to be part of a group. They don't know how to learn yet or to be part of a routine. And so extending beyond that and not giving us the opportunity and the time to prepare them for kindergarten, I think would be a disservice to the children.
Thank you. Sarah?
Just a question or something to consider. Do we have an idea if parents were going to extend in Part C, are we still going to have all children go through the evaluation and eligibility process for Part B? And
Yes.
okay, and then
They
is
have
there-
to, Sarah, because families can't choose the Part C extended option unless the child has already been determined eligible for Part B. So any child in Part C who's not eligible for Part B would not be able to continue with the Part C extended option.
Okay, and then
I guess another delta of this would be that there would be an additional transition meeting to transition from the IFSP to the IEP at the beginning of that school year. So that's kind of another transition that we're building into this process if we elect this option.
And the other piece, if parents can elect out of that extended Part C option, let's say they say, okay, I want to do this until September so they can start in the new school year, but then in March, they say, actually, no, I want to switch over to Part B. Does Part B have a timeline of how quickly we have to implement that IEP? Is it 30 days? Typically with Part C, it has to be implemented on the 3rd birthday. So that could be another delta.
Thank you, Sarah. All right, in the interest of time, I will move us along and turn the floor back over to you, Erin. And again, we continue to welcome comments or questions in the chat, and we can make provisions to build them in to make sure we're tracking them. Erin?
Yes, okay. So I'm going to go through what the proposed provision of services would look like in Maine after a reorganization of CDS occurs. In the proposed provision, we have 9 regional sites. We continue to have 9 regional sites. Those sites are very well established in their areas and serve a broad network of community providers, and they have connections, and we like that we have those networks and that people are familiar with them and have relationships with the people at the different 9 regional sites. So we would rebrand Part C to be Maine Early Intervention Services. That would help clarify for people. Right now, CDS is the name that refers to birth to 5, Part C and Part B. And many people don't realize the difference between the services that are provided between the two, between the crib to bed folks. So Maine Early Intervention Services would name what the service is that we're providing. And it would be much more clear for people in our state what we're talking about there. So again, this would be birth through age 2. It would be services delivered through an IFSP. Everything remains the same in Part C. They're under these 9 regional sites. Now the 3-year-olds are to be determined, right? So part of the work we're doing in this group and the other group is to determine, into the other bill, is to determine what we do with 3-year-old services. But the idea remains that 3-year-old services are free appropriate public education, and they are provided through an IEP, and there's a federal grant tied to them. We would propose calling this by its name as well, preschool special education programming, because that's what CDS is providing to 3 to 5-year-olds. It's providing special education programming to access preschool. So preschool special education programming. And then the administrative units would be taking over as part of the reorganization 4-year-old plus children. So they would have this 4+ for 619 services under IDEA, federally grant funded, free appropriate public education served through an IEP. And that would be in addition to 611 children 5 through 22. So those are that's the proposed provision of service, with the to be determined would be the addition of the 3-year-olds. Where and how are we going to be programming for those? So, sorry, I clicked the end of the slideshow here. I don't know what button next step, sorry. So next steps, Carol, did you want me to talk about next steps and then you chime in, or how did you want to?
Yeah, let's go ahead, please. We'll do it that way. Thank you, Erin.
Okay. So you all know that we have another stakeholder group. We're having 2 of these stakeholder groups a day. And because of the size of the group, we split it up into 2 different groups. So the next time we meet will be in November 22nd. And by that time, we will have from this group elected a chairperson. And that person, the responsibility will be to really take this information on and to provide a sense of feedback to the Ed Committee that's beyond the Department of Education and our proposal of these matters. So we will be talking in the next session about the timeline for when we think these things might be and should be done. In 386, the next bill that we're working on, we are tasked with also determining what 3-year-old services would look like. So we will likely provide some information to you guys about that as well, in terms of what provision of services could look like for 3-year-olds to get your input. The next meeting will really be on a timeline recommendation that we would be putting forth for these, for the extended Part C option and for Part 3 services, and to rebrand Part C services into Maine Early Intervention Services. Then we will be writing a report and presenting it to a committee, and we would invite all of you to participate in that and provide public comment based on your experience and what you would like to see happen.
Okay, thanks so much, Erin and team. And I would just say, please remember, if you're, oh, I'm seeing a comment from you, Amy. We're not expecting this group back for tonight. No, we're not. You have fulfilled your participation expectation and hope by being here now. So thank you for that. It will just be essentially a repeat of what we've done, potentially with different conversation based on different people, but we'll be covering the exact same material and looking for feedback in the exact same spots. So thanks so much for being here. Quick reminder, circling back to the opening part of the meeting and inviting anyone who would like to nominate themselves or anyone else to be chair of this committee to please be sure to reach out a week from Friday is the deadline, November 5th, and we invite you to reach out to Erin. And again, I think we put her email on the screen and people probably have it anyway. So thanks for being here. And I think that's it. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. Your participation is very welcome, and your thoughts and comments have been very helpful.
Okay. Bye-bye, everyone.